Wallace Hardware's long history begins with humble beginnings, steady growth, and ever-expanding customer service. Our story starts with D.M. Wallace, who back in the early 1900s dropped out of school after the 8th grade because his family was very poor. They needed him to work. He was drawn to the hardware industry, and he would see Mr. Whitaker, the president of the C.E. Baylor Company, on the street in downtown Morristown from time to time, asking Mr. Whitaker, "Could I get a job?" "Sorry, Wallace, I don't have anything for you to do." At the end of that summer, Mr. Whitaker ran into Mr. Wallace again and said, "Wallace, where you been all summer?" He said, "Mr. Whitaker, I've been up in Kentucky selling Bibles." Taken back a little bit, Mr. Whitaker said, "Selling Bibles in Kentucky? Well, how did you do?" "Oh, I did good, Mr. Whitaker. I did real good." Mr. Whitaker responded, "If you can sell Bibles, you can sell hardware." So he got a job. 1910, D.M. Wallace begins working in a retail hardware store in downtown Morristown. In the early 1920s, probably 1921, Mr. Whitaker and Mr. Holsinger approached D.M. Wallace and said, "We would like to open up our own hardware store. Mr. Baylor is no longer here, and the boys are going through the money, and they're all driving Packards. We'd like for you to come with us." Mr. Wallace didn't have the money. He told them he'd love to go with them, but he couldn't be a proprietor. They said, "If you'll go with us, we'll give you 10% of the business." And with that, the three of them went around the corner in Morristown and built Whitaker Holsinger Jobbers, Inc. In the early years of the company, Whitaker Holsinger had three main salesmen traveling in East Tennessee, visiting hardware store and picking up orders. In early January of 1932, Mr. Whitaker passed away, leaving instructions in his will and to his wife to elect D.M. Wallace as president of the company. On May the 15th in 1944, D.M. Wallace called a special meeting of the stockholders, where he received their approval to change the company name. A few weeks later, in July the 1st, the company changed its name to Wallace Hardware Company. In 1948, the company developed the Wallace Green W logo that is still being used today. In the 1950s, following graduation, John Wallace joined the firm working as a salesman in the territory based out of Knoxville. In 1951, Wallace Hardware printed its first catalog. The catalog was created using an electronic typewriter called a Varityper, which allowed the printing department to create a master page for each page of the catalog, one page at a time. In 1955, D.M. Wallace passes away, leaving the company in the hands of his brother, J.G. Wallace. In the early 1950s, D.M. Wallace's son, John Wallace, was a salesman for the company. Back then, the orders, the goods, were shipped by common carrier or even by rail. Young John Wallace came up with an idea. And that week, as he saw his customers, he asked if they could get their order delivered by Friday, would they increase the size of the order? What he had done is arranged for one of the men in Morristown who delivered coal to the homes to have his truck available Thursday evening for loading and delivery on Friday. Well, by the end of the decade, Wallace Hardware had set the benchmark in the hardware industry for handling outbound delivery with their own trucks. Mr. Wallace started a small company called Seven Wheels, most probably because his father, D.M. Wallace, had 7 grandchildren. In the summer of 1963, Wallace Hardware became affiliated with Pro Hardware, at that time out of Stamford, Connecticut. Pro provided Wallace with the tools to help its customers be successful, to be profitable, and to grow. On Memorial Day in 1964, the company moved into a brand new 160,000 square foot distribution center located in the southern part of the county on the family's farm. The new building featured a state-of-the-art 1,700-foot track. The track and its 200 buggies allowed the pickers to pick and stage the merchandise, load them on the trucks to be delivered into the 5-state territory they served at that time. That same year, John Wallace and Ray Bradley made the decision to divide the company, with Mr. Wallace taking the wholesale side as Wallace Hardware and Mr. Bradley the retail, to be run as Bradley's Hardware. In the 1960s, Wallace Hardware sent out its first van to dealers 4 times a year to show new items and new goods. On July 4th holiday weekend in 1965, Wallace Hardware held its first dealer market and open house, drawing a crowd of over 250 families each day for the company's 3-day event. After the success of the inaugural dealer market, Wallace continued to hold its trade shows annually and eventually twice a year. In 1972, celebrating its 50 years in business, the company held a golden anniversary market and gave away a gold Cadillac as the grand prize. In 1989, Wallace implemented its lumber and building material division. The majority of the items that Wallace sold at that time went into the building industry, so John Wallace knew that lumber would complement that and would be positive for the company. Throughout the 80s and the 90s, Wallace expanded its growth and reach across the Southeast into West Virginia and eventually into Pennsylvania with the acquisition of another hardware distributor from the central part of that state. In December of 2002, Stanley Snowden is named president of the Wallace Hardware Company. Stanley set his sights on upgrading and improving the company's operational systems and its technology. On Thanksgiving Day in 2008, John Wallace died. At the end of that year, his son Doyle Wallace became the company's president, leading the company to today's milestones. Today, Wallace Hardware has 250 employees that help with the 50,000 items kept in the facility, loading on 33 delivery trucks week in and week out into the 13-state area that we cover.